Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. This is Mango Oblivion Plays and we're back talking more about Civilization VII just a couple of days after that gameplay reveal trailer. Several different content creators and YouTube personalities were invited to Firaxis Studios to play an early version of the game. And although they weren't allowed to record when they were there, they did get to take notes and they are allowed to talk about their experiences. And so I have watched several videos from different people who were there and got a chance to play the game, at least in this very beta version. Um, and I'm going to kind of summarize what their thoughts and feelings and some of the new features they were able to interact with that we didn't really get a full explanation of in that gameplay trailer. That was a lot more theatrical and less about exactly how things work. Um, just before we get started, a thanks to Quill18, um, who had, I think, probably the clearest video of all the ones I watched. A lot of the information that I'm going to talk about came directly from him, but there are other people's information in there as well. So let's get started. Let's learn about some of the details of Civilization VII. These people got to play only in the first age of the game, so most of it pertains to that, but we can extrapolate from there potentially what that will mean moving forward. So let's talk a little bit about early game. We did learn in the video that you're going to be able to pick a leader separately from the civilization in this game, and that's the standard way the game will be played. So, for instance, you could pick Augustus and have them lead Egypt or Rome or Greece or Mongolia, right? Any of these early era civilizations, they can be led by anybody, which is really neat. Um, and a cool way to experience this game, which really is a historical sandbox. But after that, then when the game actually starts, um, in this early game area, they talk a little bit about how your first turn works. Um, First of all, you're gonna be able to settle a city. They have a new unit called a founder, which is kind of it's a special settler, and that lets you settle cities. I think there might be a specific unit that lets you found towns. A little bit on that difference in a bit. So you start with just this founder unit that settles your first city. When you settle your first city, you do get the first technology, which is agriculture, and that unlocks the granary, so a building that you could then build. And then when the game begins, you do not have a military unit. You have to build one, but your city, once it's founded, can build a scout or a warrior unit in one turn. So basically, they're saying in your first turn, you need to build yourself a unit. You don't get to start with one. So that's kind of the big thing in this early game section. That first turn, how that's going to work, at least in this beta version that they played. Let's talk a little bit about scouts. In previous games of Civilization, scouts have been kind of useless after a certain amount of time in the game, right? After you've explored, they either get killed by barbarians or they just kind of wander until the game ends. But scouts are getting a lot of buffs in this game, which are going to make them more useful. There's two new powers that scouts have. The first increases their sight range, and it also reveals discoverables, which is their word for tribal villages, goody huts, whatever, however you want to call them. Basically, the things on the map that you go and find to get bonuses from. So you can reveal these discoverables, makes it easier for them to find. There's a certain range at which you can find them using this ability, and there's a cooldown for it afterwards. If you find one of these discoverables, you in this game will be getting options of what you want to get from that tribal village. So they will probably give you one or two options that you get to pick from, and then you can get those bonuses. The second ability it has allows it to basically sit in one spot and then reveal what happens in an area several squares wide. So basically, it becomes like a sentinel that lets you see what's happening in that area. So potentially later in the game, when you're going to war with someone, you could post up a scout on the borders of that civ, and then you can see what they're doing on those borders because of this ability, which is pretty nifty. So they made scouts more useful, um, in this game. Moving on, settlements. They're no longer called cities and cities in this game. They use the word settlements, and that's because there are two kinds. Um, so there's two different kinds of settlements. The first one are cities. These are going to be your bigger major settlements where you do all your science and your culture and the bulk of your production are going to be happening in cities. They're basically like major settlements. And then there are towns, which are lesser cities, which are more utilized for farming resources. The game developers that these different players talk to mentioned that by the end of the game, right, your cities are going to be urbanized and have things focusing on producing culture, science, etc., whereas your towns will be featured and more focused on resource generation. So if you think about how the world really works, right? If you live in a major city like Chicago, for instance, right, you're not growing your own food in Chicago. There are other areas around Chicago that are growing your food, getting your resources, and they're being sent to the cities. So in this game, that is going to more closely mirror reality, with smaller minor cities producing the resources to grow your bigger cities that focus on the arts and sciences and stuff like that. This game will have a settlement limit, which will be in your upper left-hand corner, and that is not a hard cap, it is a soft cap. So at the beginning of the game, it seems that you'll be starting with a cap of 3. And basically the way they described it was you can go over that cap, but you're going to be hit with penalties if you do so. So production will slow down, people will become less happy because you've made your empire inefficient. That settlement limit can be changed through upgrades. So as you go along, you can increase your settlement limit, which will increase the size of your civilization. Let's talk a little bit about districts since we just talked about settlements. In Civ 6, districts were introduced, and there were lots of different types of districts. There were, there's the culture district, there was the science district, there was the military district, there was the neighborhood district, and they all had different things that they could play. They were all specialty districts. In this game, there's going to be two main types of districts, and that is going to be the urban district, which are going to be built around cities and contain buildings like granaries and libraries and stuff like that. And they'll provide science and culture and production and food and stuff like that. Urban districts are going to be created when you build buildings. So in that first turn, when you get the granary from agriculture, after you build your unit, you could choose to build a granary, and then you can set that granary either in your city center, or you can move it out into another tile, and each of those tiles is going to be able to hold 2 buildings. At least in the Antiquity Age, that was the way the game worked that they were playing. So in the video I saw, the several videos I saw, a lot of people took that granary and took it out of the city center and put it in another tile. And so then that tile had one slot with a granary in it, and then there's another slot open for another building. And that left another slot open in their capital, in their city center, for another building as well. Rural districts are going to be mostly seen in towns, and they're the replacement for improvements. So now in this game, you're not going to have builders that build improvements. Instead, you're going to be getting rural districts, and they're going to yield resources like food, production, stuff like that. They might get you resources like luxury resources or strategic resources. And these are created when your population grows. So when your city goes from a population of 1 to 2, you'll be able to create a rural district, and you get to click on a tile. And so when you click on that tile, you don't get to choose what you're picking. So for instance, if there's a tile with wood on it, you're going to get a log cutter camp. If there's a flat area that would be good for a farm, it's going to tell you that that is a farm tile. So you can't, there's not really a decision you make there. You're just deciding which tile you're going to utilize, and the bonuses you'll get from that tile. And so then if that tile has a resource on it in particular, you'll start getting that resource because you have a rural district there. In certain circumstances, districts can be specialized. So in Civilization, right, each civ has unique buildings and units and whatnot. In this game, if you fill a civilization, if you fill a district, an urban district, with both of the civilization's special buildings, that building or that district will become a special district with a new name, and it will give distinct bonuses that are special to that civilization. The example in Egypt, which is one of the videos I saw, was if they put the two buildings in there. I don't remember what the buildings were called, but that creates the necropolis district, and that gives you bonuses. So I think the bonus was like 100 gold for every wonder you build, which is pretty awesome. So there's an incentive, a bonus for putting your Civ's special buildings in the same district. Speaking of improvements, like I said, improvements are no longer going to be made by specialized units like workers or builders, so you don't have to waste your production on workers or builders. It's really just going to be defined by the city's population. Improvements will now be handled by rural districts, and like I said, players aren't going to be able to choose what that tile does. Woods will become lumber yards, plains will become farms, hills will become mines. A navigable river is going to be like a fishing boat. Ocean tiles will be fishing boats, that kind of thing. This is really going to lessen the micromanagement of having to build these builders and then decide what they're going to do, right? It's going to streamline that process, which is going to be really helpful, I think, to make the game a little less tedious in the long run. Let's move on to civics. Just like in Civ 6, there will be a civic tree, but in this game there will actually be two. So as you play through each age, you'll have access to two civic trees. The first one is going to be the standardized civics tree, the one that you're used to from Civ 6, with various civics on it that grant you buildings and boosts and whatever. The second tree will be available, and it's going to be tied to the specific civ you have. So each civ is going to have their own specific second civic tree with different options, bonuses, etc. The unique buildings for your civilization will be unlocked via this special civilization civic tree. So Egypt, for example, those two special buildings that made the necropolis, you're going to get that from your unique civilization civic tree. Government is also going to remain pretty similar to Civilization VI with a few changes. So governments, they were showed off three possible government options in the Antiquity Age. That was the Classical Republic, despotism, and oligarchy. Governments are going to tie heavily into a new happiness mechanic. So just like in Civ 5, your empire is going to have a certain level of happiness. And if you gather enough happiness, it'll trigger a celebration, and that provides bonuses. And the government policies that you pick or the governments that you choose are really going to tie into that mechanic. You'll also be able to pick policies that will give you bonuses in the game. The players that I listened and watched said that they started with about one, and some of them got up to 8 by the end of the age. So you're going to be able to grow the amount of government policies you get over time, and that's just as you develop through the age. Next, let's talk about independent powers. Independent powers, they talked a little bit about in the gameplay reveal, and independent powers are basically the next version of a city-state. The way it was explained in the videos I watched is that an independent power is going to be like the barbarian clans and barbarian clan mode in Civilization 6. At least that's the way I interpreted it. Basically, they're going to start off as kind of like a lesser version of a city-state, and then as you interact and work with them, they will grow until they become a city-state, becoming basically a minor civ. So their power will be limited at the beginning, and then they'll grow as you interact with them, eventually becoming more powerful as like a city-state option. Not a whole lot of details on that, but that's kind of the vibe I was getting from watching these different videos. Moving on into diplomacy, interacting with other civs in this game is going to be much more meaningful than it was in the past, and that's due to some major changes they've done in the diplomacy system. So what they did is they introduced a new currency called influence, and this can be utilized to change how you interact with other civilizations. So in previous Civ games, when you met a new Civ, you basically got to say, hi, nice to meet you, let's talk a little bit, or yeah, whatever, cool, right? And there was no real benefit or hindrance to that. In this game, you can spend influence to change how you interact with them. So for instance, every time you meet a civ, you're going to have three options. You'll have a friendly option where you get to see their capital and you talk to them and you're going to improve your relationship. You can have a neutral interaction with them. So like let's say you're out of influence, you can just have a neutral one where you're just kind of like, nice to meet you. And then there's also a hostile one where you spend some influence and then you negatively impact your relationship from them from the get-go. This influence system is also going to open up a lot of different ways to interact with other civs. So for instance, several of the players described the cultural exchange, which is a new thing that you can do with civs where you use some influence and you propose a cultural exchange. So basically you say, hey, Rome, I want to have a cultural exchange with you. And then Rome has a couple of options. They can say, sure, that sounds like a great plan. And then they both you and Rome would get a cultural bonus. You would get a bigger one because you suggested it. Or they could say no, and then it doesn't happen. Or they can say, hey, I'm going to spend a little bit of influence as well, and then we're both going to get more culture from this. So there's a lot of different ways that this can come together to give you powerful benefits outside of just denouncing and trading. Also, influence is going to have a big influence on how wars are fought. Turns out they were talking about how like, you know how in Civ 6 they introduced the idea of like a surprise war and how there was negative impact of going to war without a reason. In this game, if you declare a surprise war on somebody, you give the other player 150 influence, and then you gain support. So there's this new support system in the game where you spend influence to have envoys that are basically out there being like justifying your war and saying like, you know, this is a thorough reason, we're doing this for the right reasons. And other civs who aren't in the war can also spend influence to basically say whose side they're on. So it's a way to support other civs without joining them. And I think that system is going to make it a lot more interesting and make it a lot more useful and beneficial to have positive relationships with other civs and spending that influence to have that positive relationship. So I'm really excited to see how this plays into the game and how much you can utilize it, but then also maybe potentially, if you're not used to it, how much can you ignore it before it leads to something bad happening to you? Let's move on to the tech tree. In previous civs, right, each game has had a different tech tree with different techs and like what they do. In this game, some technologies will have what's called a mastery option. And so basically, once you finish a technology, let's say for simplicity, it was pottery. If you finish pottery, right, it took you like 10 turns, you research pottery, you could then research pottery mastery, and that would take another set amount of turns. But if you do that, you would get more bonuses. So not just like, you know, the building and the bonus from having pottery, you might get something else, or that building that you got does more because of that. So that could be really helpful to master certain techs. And if you complete masteries, you get something called a codicy, and that is apparently part of the science victory track. So mastering certain things or mastering as many as possible can be beneficial to you because I believe it is part of a victory condition. They didn't really get to go over victory conditions because they were only in the Antiquity Age, but this was definitely tied into bonuses for ages. So getting codices can be important. Let's move over to the leaders in the game. Leaders now have things called attributes, which was kind of talked about a little bit in their reveal trailer, but now the players who got to play it got to talk a little bit more about it. These attributes are with the leader through the whole game because you're going to always have the same leader. So if you pick Tokugawa of Japan, you're going to be Tokugawa the whole game, even if your civ changes in different ages. There are 6 different attribute types, which I went over in the last video I talked about this game with. You know, one of them's science, one of them's diplomacy, one of them's culture. And you earn points that you can spend on these attributes via age quests. So in the ages, There will be quests and tasks that you can complete that'll get you points, and then those points can be spent on upgrades for your leader, which will last the entirety of the game. So pretty important. Um, the way they were talking about it, it didn't really answer my question of will the trees for these leaders be different for each leader, or is it just the same for each one? Is it generic or is it specialized for each leader? I'm still not sure about that. Interested to find out if they're specialized or not. Combat is also going to be seeing a big change in this game. In the video where they kind of showed off gameplay for the first time, they really showed off like the units and how they move and how they look, but they didn't really talk about the major changes to combat that were going to be happening in this game. They were really showing off the visual aspects of it, but not the mechanical aspects. Um, Combat is going to change a lot, and that's because individual units are no longer going to be receiving promotions. So if your warrior beats a couple barbarians, he's not going to get a promotion. He's not going to get battle cry or whatever. Instead, warfare and combat is going to revolve around a new unit called the army commander. And this army commander is going to be an incredibly important unit because it's going to be the center point of your combat operations. Basically, army commanders are units that you're going to center in and around your battle units. They're not great people. They can just be built in cities, so you don't have to like earn them. You can just build them as you go. And they have several different attributes that are important. For one, if you lose your warlord or your army commander, they do respawn, and then they don't respawn in the traditional sense of they just pop back up. Basically, what it means is the next time you build an army commander, the army commander that spawns is going to have the same promotions that your defeated army commander had. So you're not going to lose your progress the way you would if they don't respawn like that. They also have a range to apply the buffs that they have. So in the video I watched, the army commander had like a 1 unit radius around itself, and any unit that was in that radius gains its promotion buffs. They can grab units, clump them up for easy movement across the map. So basically what I saw is that if you have, let's say, 5 units around your army commander and you're all the way by your cities and not by your opponent's cities, you can press a button and all those units will clump together into the commander spot and they'll become one distinct unit. And then you can move them across the map as 1 unit instead of having to move 6 units independently. Because if you've played a lot of Civ 6, you know that moving all those units across the map can be very challenging because if they ever cross paths, it'll completely cancel their movement and you have to remove them again. This will make it way easier because they're going to be moving in clumps. You can also use them to order mass melee attacks or mass ranged attacks for all the units in their influence circle. So you can basically like speed up combat by attacking with multiple units at once using these army commanders. Now, since army commanders are getting promotions, it's probably important we talk a little bit about that. And I did get to see what some of the promotions looked like. There are 5 different types of promotions for army commanders. The first one that I saw was Bastion, which is defensive buffs. So you get, think about like the things like that archers usually get, like you take less damage from melee attacks, you take less damage from range attacks, stuff like that. Assault, which is for offense, so bonuses for attacking. Maneuver, which is a movement-based promotion, so it grants like flanking bonuses, movement bonuses, stuff like that. And then there's 2 new ones that we haven't really ever seen on combat units before. The first one is logistics, and these promotions increase production. And so basically it makes it easier for you to build units. So like if you load up on logistics promotions, it'll be easier for you to produce units. And then it also helps reinforcement, which we'll talk about on the next slide. So don't worry, we'll talk about what reinforcement is. And then leadership is another promotion track that increases yield boost. And this is really utilized in peacetime to increase the yields of cities. So like if it's peacetime and you have an army commander left over from your war and he has leadership bonuses, you can plop him on a tile and he will increase the yields of those tiles that he's around. which is kind of like how the military works in peacetime anyway, right? They don't just sit there and be like, let's plan another war. They're out in the country, right? Like there's engineers and other stuff that do things for the country. So that's kind of what that leadership track is doing. So let's talk a little bit about what reinforcement is. The Army commander has this new feature, which is called reinforcement. And really what this is doing is it's a way to get troops from your cities when you build them all the way out to where your army is. So this feature, the way it works is, let's say you're at a war with Rome, and Rome is like 15 tiles away, and you just built a new spearman because you want to get that spearman all the way over to the army. Reinforcement lets you move that unit without having to do it manually. So basically what it does is you'll go to the army commander, you'll click the reinforce button, and then you'll scroll over to your city and you'll click on the unit you built. And then that unit will disappear from the map and it's going to move to your army commander based on its base movement speed. And apparently it ignores terrain. So it can like move through mountains and stuff at its base movement speed. That number, how quickly things reinforce, can be improved through logistics promotion, so you can get things faster. So this is basically a way to make it so that you don't have to manually move units. You can use the army commander as like a center of your command and make it so units will just move to it. Very useful. I see it being really awesome. I'm really pumped about this feature. Now let's talk about the last part really of what I saw in these videos, and that is when it's time to transition from age to age. Now age transition is going to be revolve around the crisis mechanic. And so basically the idea is, right, about these ages is that in history, civilizations have moved forward and moved forward and moved forward. And then there's usually some sort of crisis or defining moment or something bad happens and it forces us to make a change. And it really pushes us into this next era of civilization. And so in this game, the way it's going to work is as your age moves through, things will happen. And then eventually at the end, there will be what they call the crisis period. And in that crisis period, it's going to force you to adopt crisis policies. And they are all bad. None of them are good. They're all going to be negative effects on your civilization. And these crisis policies are only going to last for that crisis period. So from the beginning of the crisis until the transition to the next age. So you're forced to take on these basically difficulties because the world is getting harder, the world is getting stranger, and it's going to become different soon. And so during this rough transition period, it's going to really make it difficult for you to do things because I saw a couple of these policies. They're not great. They make your units weaker. They make your production lower. They're all relatively bad. It looked like you're only going to need to adopt 1 to 3 per crisis. But like I said, I think it only lasts for that crisis period and then they go away. Finally, let's talk about legacy paths. Legacy paths are a part of this transition, and they're basically like win conditions for each of the ages. So there's 4 categories that they showed off. There's science, culture, military, and economic legacy paths. And basically in each age, you're going to be given this path to bonuses in these 4 different categories. So for instance, the science one, in the antiquity age, the guy I was watching was saying like the goal of the antiquity age in science for this legacy path is to get, it was like 10 codices or something like that. And then there are tasks that go along that path to get to the 10 codices. And as you complete tasks, there are checkpoints that you hit. And when you hit those checkpoints, you get bonuses. So like the first one was like an increase in science per turn. And then the second one was like an increase in science buildings or something like that. And then finally, when you reach the end of it, you get a golden age in science. And so basically, I think the way, I don't know if this is exactly how it works, but the way I understand it is for the rest of that age, then you're going to get a huge science bonus because you're in a golden age of science because you completed the 10 codices or something like that. The cultural one was like build 7 wonders in your civilization. The military one was take over a certain amount of cities. The economic one was trade route related. So these legacy paths are really kind of ways to point you in the right direction to get to victory conditions. We didn't get to see any victory conditions for the game because, right, they only made it through that first age. So we don't know what the victory conditions are. But clearly these legacy paths are pointing you in the right direction so that you get to the victory condition, or it's pushing you towards a victory condition. The other thing that they really emphasized is that if in the first age you really go ham on science, and then in the second age you decide, nah, I'm going to go economic, that's totally okay as well. So like this also makes it easier for you to shift your strategy as the game progresses. Because in one age you might go really hard on one, um, and then in the next age you might go hard on something else based on the how the game is going. The other thing they mentioned is that in each of these four categories, you're working on all four of them simultaneously. So they basically said you're going to get to that first checkpoint on all of them every time, unless you are just having the worst game ever. Like you are going to solidly hit those first four checkpoints. It's where you're going to get after that that's really going to define how your game's going, right? So your goal is to probably complete one. If you're doing really well, you might complete two of them, and then you're going to get a certain length on the other two, right? So that's kind of where these legacy paths come in. And that's all the information I got from watching these videos. I'm really glad I was able to share all this information with you. I think it's very pertinent. And I'm just really excited about this game. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you know that I'm a huge fan of Civilization. And I think this seventh installment of the game is going to be even better than the other ones beforehand. So thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, you liked what you saw, subscribe, like the video, maybe drop a comment. If you're returning, thanks for coming back, and we'll see you again soon. Look out for some more Civilization VI content as we wait for Civilization VII to drop in February. See you later.